All right, so now I have my weaving. You can see now it's more balanced, the weave there. You can see it's almost like there are squares of warp and weft when you look through it. So I went ahead and I just took this skewer and I pushed one row down all the way across and then went up a row and kept pushing the yarn down towards the teeth until everything was more compacted. You can see the top row still has a little bit more space. It's easier to push it down once we do the next, well, it's pushing down some, but it's easier to really get it more pushed down once we do the next pass of the weft. So it should look like a grid where you have one color for your warp and then a color for your weft. So you can see right here, this is called plain weave. So that's the first inch. And it should be 8 pieces of yarn per inch based on the yarn that I gave you. It's 8 across with the warp. And you can see here on my ruler, I have, it's just about 1 inch right here that those 8 pieces of yarn fills up. It's slightly over, but it'll get more packed down as we're weaving more. So I would say it's less than 1/8 of an inch over. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we'll take the rigid heddle off so you understand how that works, and it lifts up every other thread, alternating based on if you push or pull down so that you can weave plain weave with it. But now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with basket weave. It's a different weave structure, similar to plain weave in the fact that it's over, under, but instead of lifting up one piece of yarn up and then down and then up and then down, we're gonna have 2 pieces of yarn at a time. So go ahead and take off whatever you have securing the sides of your rigid heddle, whether it be those rings if they fit onto yours, or tape, wire, rubber bands, whatever you used. So the rigid heddle comes off. I'm going to make sure again that the warp is pushed down. It was coming up along these pegs. I don't want it to slide up. So now what I'm going to do, instead of using the rigid heddle to lift the yarn up and down, I'm going to use one of these sticks that came with the loom. So I'm going to go from right to left, and I'll lift up 2 pieces of yarn, and I'm going to take this stick and go over the next 2. And now I'm going to go under 2 pieces of yarn and go over 2, under 2. So you can see here it's 1, 2, and then underneath it's 1, 2, 1, 2, underneath is 1, 2. And I want to make sure that I'm doing the yarn from the right to the left. You could go left to right if it's easier for you, but I want to make sure that they're consecutive yarn. So I'm not crossing the yarn, but where it comes off of the pegs, it's 1, 2, and then under 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm not taking something over here and lifting it up before I do the next one. So under and then over. So I'm going to go under 2 and over 2. So I'm just going to move my way across the loom like this. If you have sandpaper and you want to sand down this stick here so that it's pointed on one end or flatter on one end to pick up the yarn, you're welcome to do that. If you don't want to spend the time, that's fine. It works like this. So I'm just going to move all the way across my loom, picking up 2 and going over 2. So I want to go under 2 and then over 2, and under 2 and over 2. And be real careful that you don't pull the yarn off the pegs that's holding the warp on as you do this. So I've gone all the way across. At the end, I just have one lonely piece of yarn. I'm just going to leave it like that. It's totally fine. And I'm going to turn this up for the shed and go ahead and stick in this thicker piece of wood, which you could use to begin with if you want to, and lift it up for the shed. I'm going to take my shuttle, is still attached to the yarn that I wove the plain weave with. So I'm going to go ahead and unwind it so I have a piece of yarn long enough to do this, to go across. So I'm going to put the shuttle through the shed, just like we did before, and I'll flatten that piece of wood and push it down, push the yarn down. And then I'm going to lift it back up. I'm not going to take it out before I lift it back up. So you can see here there's this plain weave structure, and now you can see there's more of the bigger slots. So 2 pieces of yarn going over the weft, and then the weft is covering 2 pieces of yarn on the warp. So I'm going to leave it up, and I'm going to go back with the same shed. So instead of just going back like this, if I were to go back like this, the yarn would come undone. So I need to hook it on the outermost piece of yarn. So instead of going under like I did last time with that yarn, I'm going to go over that last piece of yarn so it catches the weft and it doesn't come all the way apart. So what this does, it gives a plain weave like pattern, but it's called basket weave because it has bigger blocks of color. So I'm holding this last piece of yarn and pulling the weft gently and making sure not to draw in too much. I'm going to flatten that shed stick and push it down. So I'll turn this up so you can see what it looks like. You can see now it's a thicker block of color. There are 2 pieces of yarn going through this at a time. Another way of doing this, instead of going one way and then back, is to have 2 pieces of yarn that you bring through at the same time, but then you need another shuttle and you'd have to wind another ball. So this is easier with what we have right now. So now I'm going to go back the other way. I'm going to use my stick to pick up opposite. So right here, these 2 pieces of yarn went over. Now they're going to go, or they went, the warp went over the weft. Now it's going to go under the weft. So I want to put my stick on top of those, and now it goes under. So you're just going to do opposite of what you did before. If the yarn was underneath the weft, now it's going to be over the weft. So you can see the pattern that we're starting. So you want to move. Oh, I skipped one. Okay, so here's a mistake. Right here, you can see there's only 1 piece of yarn that I went over instead of 2 pieces. So what I need to do is unweave everything and redo it. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to keep going. So if you do have a mistake, go ahead and undo it and do it correctly, because you'll find out very shortly if there's a mistake, and it's good to correct it right away. You can see I'm manipulating the warp and holding onto it as I push the stick through the shed that I'll put my weft through. So I'm going to tilt it up and then make this bigger one. So before I put my shuttle through, I'm going to go ahead and try to beat this down as much as possible. And then I'll come back with my skewer and really push it down. All right, so I'm going to take my shuttle and put it through the shed. So I do 1 pass through the shed, beat it down. I'm going to lift it up and I'm going to go back. So this time, as I go back, the very end yarn is underneath. So I want to make sure, because my yarn was coming over it, I'm going to go under that piece of yarn. I'm going to get closer so you can see that. See how it's coming over that end piece of yarn? So now I want to go under it and then go through the shed. So going under it, this warp yarn will catch that so it can't come undone. All right, so I'm pulling this through. You can see this 1 piece of yarn here where it's looped around, it's holding that into place. Flatten my stick. Get the yarn down as much as possible. So now you can see this is plain weave. So what I'm going to do is I'll take my skewer and I'm going to go across. So I'm going to do the top of the plain weave pushing down. And now I'm going to go back for the basket weave and push it down. So the goal is to do 1 inch of each of these weave structures. So as you're weaving, you want to beat everything down and then measure so that you have 1 inch of each weave structure. So to continue the plain weave, just in case, in case